It was supposed to be a peaceful hike, a chance to escape the noise of everyday life and reconnect with nature. The crisp autumn air carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. I adventured deep into the woods, far from the trails most hikers frequented, seeking solitude. But what I found instead was anything but tranquil. As I rounded a bend near a rocky outcrop, I heard it, a soft whimpering sound, barely audible over the rustling of leaves and distant chirping of birds. At first, I thought it might be the wind or perhaps an injured animal hidden somewhere nearby. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound, stepping carefully over roots and rocks until I reached a small clearing. There, standing no more than 10 feet away, was a bear cub, tiny, trembling, and clearly distressed. The cub's fur was matted with dirt, and its wide, dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. It didn't run or growl as I approached. Instead, it took a hesitant step forward, almost as if it wanted something from me. My heart raced. Encounters with wild animals are unpredictable at best, and here I was face to face with a creature whose mother could appear at any moment. Yet, there was something about the cub's demeanor, its vulnerability, its desperation, that stopped me from backing away. Then I noticed the source of its distress. Just beyond the clearing, partially obscured by bushes, lay the motionless form of an adult bear. Its massive body was sprawled awkwardly across the ground, one paw caught in a steel trap, blood staining the surrounding foliage. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a cry for help. Somehow, this tiny cub had sought me out, trusting that I might be able to save its mother. For a moment, panic gripped me. What could I possibly do? I was alone, unarmed, and miles from civilization. Even if I managed to free the mother bear, there was no guarantee she wouldn't see me as a threat once she regained her strength. Bears are wild animals, after all, not pets, and their instincts don't align with human notions of gratitude. Still, looking into the cub's pleading eyes, I knew I couldn't walk away. Whatever happened next, I had to try. Taking a deep breath, I scanned the area for tools I could use. Nearby, I spotted a sturdy branch lying among the underbrush. Grabbing it, I cautiously approached the trapped bear, keeping one eye on the cub, which followed closely behind me. As I drew nearer, the mother bear stirred weakly, letting out a low groan that reverberated through the forest. Her gaze met mine, filled with pain but also a flicker of awareness, as if she understood I wasn't there to harm her. Using the branch, I began prying at the jaws of the trap, wincing as the metal creaked under pressure. The bear flinched each time the device shifted, but she didn't lash out. Instead, she let out another pained grunt, her breathing shallow and labored. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trap sprang open, releasing her paw. Blood trickled from the wound, but she seemed otherwise unharmed. Slowly, painstakingly, she rose to her feet, towering over me with a presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. I froze, unsure whether to stay or flee. But then something extraordinary happened. The bear turned toward her cub, nudging it gently with her snout before casting a final glance in my direction. There was no aggression in her gaze, only something akin to gratitude. Then, without another sound, she lumbered off into the trees, the cub scampering after her. Standing there amidst a quiet aftermath, I realized I had witnessed something rare, a fleeting connection between species, born not of dominance or fear, but of mutual understanding. Little did I know, however, that this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything I thought I knew about nature, survival, and the bonds we share, even with creatures seemingly so different from ourselves. The forest fell silent after the bears disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a lingering sense of unease. What had just happened? Had I truly saved them, or merely delayed the inevitable? The mother bear's wound was severe. Even if she survived the immediate trauma, infection could still claim her life. And without her, the cub wouldn't last long in the wild. My mind raced with questions, guilt gnawing at the edges of my conscience. I'd done what I could, but was it enough? As I retraced my steps back toward the trailhead, the weight of the encounter settled over me like a heavy blanket. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the mother bear, or worse, another predator, emerging from the shadows. By the time I reached my car, exhaustion had set in, not just physical, but emotional. I knew I couldn't leave things as they were. If the bears didn't survive, their fate would rest squarely on my shoulders. That evening, unable to shake the image of the injured mother and her fragile cub, I contacted a local wildlife rehabilitation center. They listened intently as I recounted the details of the encounter, asking for specifics about the location, the type of trap, and the condition of the animals. "It sounds like a leg-hold trap," the operator explained grimly. "Those are illegal in this area, but poachers sometimes use them anyway. We'll send someone out first thing tomorrow morning to assess the situation." Relieved that help was on the way, I spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the events in my head. Was I foolish to intervene? Bears are apex predators, capable of immense strength and ferocity. Yet, in that moment, they hadn't seemed dangerous, just desperate. Their trust in me, however fleeting, felt profound, almost sacred. It wasn't just an act of survival. It was a reminder of our shared vulnerability, a connection that transcended species. Early the next morning, I returned to the clearing with 2 wildlife officers, armed with tranquilizers, medical supplies, and a plan to locate the bears. The journey back felt surreal, as though I were stepping into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. When we arrived, the scene was eerily unchanged. The trap lay discarded where I'd left it, its cruel jaws gaping open like the maw of some metallic beast. Tracks in the dirt confirmed the bears had indeed moved on, but their path was erratic, suggesting the mother was struggling to stay upright. We followed the trail cautiously, scanning the dense underbrush for signs of movement. After nearly an hour of searching, we found them huddled near a stream, partially concealed by thick foliage. The mother bear lay on her side, panting heavily, while the cub nuzzled her face, emitting soft whimpers of distress. Her wound looked worse than I'd feared, the flesh around her paw swollen and inflamed, likely infected. Without hesitation, the officers prepared the tranquilizer dart, aiming carefully before firing. Within moments, the mother bear succumbed to the sedative, her massive body going limp. Working quickly, they examined the injury, cleaning and bandaging it as best they could in the field. "She's lucky you found her when you did," one officer remarked, glancing at me. Another day or two, and this might have been fatal. Despite their professionalism, I could see the concern etched on their faces. Even with treatment, her prognosis remained uncertain. Bears are resilient creatures, but surviving such injuries in the wild is no small feat. Once stabilized, they loaded the mother bear onto a stretcher, securing her in the back of their truck for transport to the rehabilitation center. The cub, understandably agitated, refused to leave her side. For a moment, I worried they'd have to sedate him too, but then something remarkable happened. As I knelt beside him, speaking softly and extending my hand, he hesitated before nudging it gently with his nose, a gesture of trust that took my breath away. Carefully, I coaxed him into a carrier, reassuring him that his mother would be okay. Whether he understood or simply sensed my sincerity, I'll never know, but he allowed himself to be guided without resistance. At the rehabilitation center, the staff worked tirelessly to stabilize the mother bear, administering antibiotics and painkillers while monitoring her vitals around the clock. Meanwhile, the cub became a fixture in my daily routine. Though technically under the care of the facility, he seemed to gravitate toward me, following me wherever I went within the enclosure. Staff members joked that he'd adopted me as a surrogate parent, but the truth was more complex. In saving his mother, I'd inadvertently become part of their story, a bridge between their world and mine. Over the next several weeks, the mother bear showed steady improvement. Her wound healed slowly but surely, and her strength began to return. Still, the bond between her and the cub remained unshakable. Whenever she rested, he curled up beside her, refusing to stray far even during feeding times. Watching them together filled me with a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. Joy because they were healing, sorrow because I knew our time together was temporary. Eventually, they'd need to return to the wild, leaving behind a human who played a role in their survival. But nature has a way of testing resolve, and just when it seemed the worst was over, disaster struck again. One night, a storm rolled in, bringing torrential rain and gale-force winds that battered the region. Trees snapped like twigs, power lines went down, and chaos reigned. At the rehabilitation center, staff scrambled to secure enclosures and protect vulnerable animals from the elements. Despite their efforts, the storm proved too much for the facility's aging infrastructure. A tree crashed through the roof of the main building, sending debris flying and causing widespread damage. When I arrived the next morning, the scene was devastating. The mother bear's enclosure had been partially destroyed, and she was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through me as I joined the search party, combing the grounds for any sign of her. Hours passed with no luck, and despair began to creep in. Had all our hard work been for nothing? Would she survive on her own, injured and disoriented in unfamiliar territory? Then, just as hope seemed lost, we spotted her tracks leading toward a nearby ravine. Following them cautiously, we discovered her sheltering beneath an overhang, the cub tucked safely against her chest. She looked up as we approached, her eyes wary but not hostile. Somehow, despite everything, she managed to protect her cub once again. Relief washed over me, mingled with admiration for her resilience. This was a creature who embodied the very essence of survival, a testament to the indomitable spirit of nature itself. With renewed determination, the team worked to repair the enclosures and reinforce them against future storms. The bears remained in their care for several more months, until both were deemed strong enough to return to the wild. On the day of their release, I accompanied them to a remote section of forest, watching as they disappeared into the trees. Free at last. Though I knew I'd likely never see them again, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. In helping them, I'd learned invaluable lessons about courage, compassion, and the interconnectedness of all living things. Months passed since the day I watched the mother bear and her cub vanish into the wilderness, yet their presence lingered in my mind like an unshakable echo. That single encounter had awakened something within me, a deeper awareness of the delicate balance between humanity and nature, and the profound impact even small acts of kindness can have on the world around us. It wasn't just about saving two bears. It was about recognizing our shared responsibility to protect the fragile ecosystems we often take for granted. In the weeks following their release, I found myself drawn back to the forest again and again, not just as a hiker but as a steward. I began volunteering with local conservation groups, participating in cleanup efforts, trail maintenance projects, and educational programs aimed at raising awareness about wildlife preservation. Each task felt meaningful, a way to honor the trust those bears had placed in me during our brief intersection of lives. What started as a personal mission soon grew into something larger, inspiring others to join the cause. One particularly memorable project involved working with schools to teach children about coexistence with wildlife. Using photos and videos from the rehabilitation center, taken before the bears' release, I shared their story, how a chance meeting in the woods had led to recovery, resilience, and ultimately freedom. The kids were captivated, peppering me with questions about the bears' behavior, diet, and habitat. "Do you think they remember you?" one little girl asked earnestly, her wide eyes reflecting both curiosity and wonder. I smiled, unsure how to answer. Did they remember me? Probably not in the way humans understand memory, but maybe in some instinctual part of their being, they carried a sense of safety or gratitude tied to that moment when help arrived. The ripple effects of that story extended beyond classrooms and community events. Local media picked up on the tale, highlighting the dangers of illegal traps and advocating for stricter enforcement against poaching activities. The attention brought much-needed funding to the rehabilitation center, allowing them to expand their facilities and hire additional staff. More importantly, it sparked conversations about human-wildlife conflict, how we can live alongside these magnificent creatures without encroaching on their space or endangering their survival. Yet, perhaps the most unexpected outcome of all was the change it wrought within me. Before that fateful hike, I considered myself an observer of nature, a passive admirer content to marvel at its beauty from afar. But now, I understood that observation isn't enough. Nature doesn't exist merely for our enjoyment. It thrives or suffers because of our actions. Every choice we make, no matter how small, has consequences that ripple outward, affecting countless lives beyond our own. This newfound perspective influenced other areas of my life as well. Professionally, I shifted gears, channeling my energy into environmental advocacy work. Whether lobbying for policy changes, organizing fundraisers, or speaking at conferences, I became a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves: the bears, the wolves, the eagles, and every other creature fighting to survive in a rapidly changing world. Personal sacrifices came with this decision: long hours, missed social gatherings, and the occasional backlash from those resistant to change. But none of it mattered compared to fulfillment I felt knowing I was making a difference. Even my relationships evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. Friends and family, initially skeptical of my sudden immersion in conservation efforts, began to see the passion driving me. Some joined me on hikes or participated in volunteer projects, while others offered support in quieter, equally meaningful ways. Conversations shifted from surface-level pleasantries to deeper discussions about sustainability, ethics, and what kind of legacy we want to leave behind. These connections, forged through shared purpose, enriched my life in ways I never imagined possible. And then there were moments of serendipity, reminders that the universe has a way of circling back to where it began. On a crisp spring morning nearly a year after the Bears' release, I returned to the same forest where our paths first crossed. As I wandered along familiar trails, nostalgia washed over me, bringing with it a mix of emotions: pride, longing, and a tinge of sadness for adventures concluded. Just as I reached the rocky outcrop near the clearing, movement caught my eye, a flash of brown fur disappearing into the underbrush. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be them? I stood still, straining to catch another glimpse, but the forest remained silent, its secrets guarded as always. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, projecting my hopes onto shadows and rustling leaves. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was real, a fleeting visitation meant to remind me that the bond we formed, however brief, had left its mark on both sides. Regardless of whether it was truly them or simply another pair of bears roaming their ancestral home, the message was clear. Life goes on. The cycle continues, resilient and enduring, shaped by the choices we make and the compassion we extend. In helping those bears, I hadn't just saved 2 lives. I'd opened my own heart to a broader understanding of interconnectedness, responsibility, and hope. As I turned to leave the forest that day, sunlight streaming through the trees and casting golden patterns on the ground, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been challenging, unpredictable, and occasionally heartbreaking, but it had also been transformative. It taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. That forgiveness isn't limited to human interactions. It extends to repairing the harm we've done to the planet. And that sometimes the smallest gestures, a branch used to pry open a trap, a whispered promise to a frightened cub, can create ripples that stretch far beyond what we ever imagined. In the end, the bears gave me more than I gave them. They reminded me of the power of connection, the importance of humility, and the beauty of trusting in something greater than ourselves. Their story didn't belong solely to them or to me. It belonged to everyone willing to listen, learn, and act. Because in the grand tapestry of existence, every thread matters, no matter how seemingly insignificant.